This episode of Ghost Maps was recorded on Audio-Technica mics. Ghost Maps. Entry 9, Pulau Tekong, Singapore. A group of National Service boys walks past us, heading down to the bus interchange to take the shuttle to the ferry terminal. It's around 8 in the evening, and Ben and I are in the food court of the White Sands Mall. We smile as we catch snippets of their conversations about strict sergeants, physical fitness tests, rifle ranges, and where they're getting posted after they finish basic training. One particular thread stands out to us though. You ever hear about the lady in white? A bespectacled recruit asks his friends. One of them says he saw her sitting near the pull-up bars. Another swears he saw her in the reflection of the mirror in the toilet. Ben and I chuckle as they trail off. He tells me that some variation of that story has been floating around for years. I tell him the bunk with 3 doors is the one I hear most often. Ben is an old friend of my mentor. The lines on his face are gentler than my mentor's were. He knew what my mentor did and what I do now. But he never really joined in, choosing instead to start a family. His son's about my age now. He's expecting his 3rd grandchild soon. Ben does have one story to share though. It's one that he's told my mentor before, but he thinks it's worth recounting it again for me, personally, considering its significance. He says that so many stories come out of Tekong. What he offers is a possible reason for that. And before I can chime in, he gives me a cheeky wink and tells me he'll start at the beginning. Ben had been camping on Tekong with a couple of friends, including my mentor, since the early 70s. Back then, there were still a lot of people living on the island, mostly haka fishermen or farmers and their families. And there were also quite a few temples around. On Ben and his friend's first trip to the island, a lady in her late 40s that they would get to know over the years as Auntie Sumoy told them to head to the temple of the sun deity. She said that they needed to give their thanks for the protection that the deity offered. Ben, a young and brash man then, was about to say that he wasn't Buddhist. He was going to say that he didn't need protection and that his wits and his own abilities were enough to keep him safe. But he didn't, because my mentor stepped in first and said to Auntie Sumoy in a warm and gracious tone, "Of course, Auntie. Thank you." On the walk over to the temple, my mentor told Ben and the rest of the group that this wasn't about faith. It was about respect. And that he added, knowingly, that this place required a kind of protection that none of them would be able to comprehend. The group had a great weekend camping on Tekong. No trouble, nothing out of the ordinary, just the kind of fun that they would all remember for the rest of their lives. And it would continue that way for most of the decade. Then, the late 70s rolled around, and plans were made for the island to be turned into a military training center. One by one, the temples chose to shut their doors. And as time went on, those camping trips started to feel different. It would start with noises that the group has never heard before, coming from the treetops. Nothing more than that. When there were just 3 temples left on the island, however, Ben's friends would claim that they could see things moving in the shadows at night. Ben would tell them that it was probably just some nocturnal animals emboldened by the fact that the island had fewer people. But then the rest of the group would look at my mentor. He wouldn't say anything. He didn't need to. And after that, the group grew smaller and smaller each visit. By the time the temple of the sun deity was the only temple left, only Ben and 2 of his friends were still willing to go camping on Tekong. My mentor refused to follow them. The very last time they camped out on the island, the 3 of them were greeted by Auntie Sumoy, as usual, reminding them, as she always did, to give thanks at the temple. More out of habit than anything else, they smiled politely and did so. That night, none of them could sleep. It wasn't the strange sounds or the things in the shadows that kept them up, but an uneasy feeling. Later, they would all agree they felt like they were no longer welcome there. At around 3 in the morning, Ben would walk a couple of meters away from their tents to relieve himself. Just as he was done, from the corner of his eye, he saw something moving. Unlike the other times though, it wasn't something hidden in the shadows. What he saw was a flash of white. Ben whipped his head around, hoping against all hope that it was just his imagination, but instinctively, knowing better. Everywhere he turned, he only caught glimpses of the pale hem of a dress, moving almost silently in the dark among the trees. Finally, he stood his ground, refusing to budge. He took a breath to keep his tone level and said to whatever was taunting him that he wasn't scared and that the sun deity would protect him. From nowhere and all around him, a voice that sounded like nails on a chalkboard whispered, "Tapi, berapa lama lagi?" But for how long more? Ben ran back to the tents and woke his friends, telling them to pack up. They protested, saying it was still 3:30 in the morning and there was nowhere for them to go. But Ben insisted. A short while later, the 3 of them stood in front of the temple of the sun deity. Next to the temple stood Auntie Sumoy. "Come," she said to them. "Come, you're safe." Ben only ever went back to the island once more before it officially turned into what it is today. It was in September of 1986. By then, almost all of the island's residents had left for the mainland. But on that morning, when he arrived on Tekong, Ben wasn't at all surprised to see Auntie Sumoy seemingly waiting for him. Time and experience had made Ben a smarter man, a wiser man. Possibly, for the first time ever, not out of habit, but out of genuine respect, Ben greeted the old woman warmly. She replied, "You are here as part of the procession." Ben nodded and made his way to the temple of the sun deity, where many former residents, together with the help of army personnel, were moving the last of the temple's idols to its new home in Bedok. When the temple and the crowd gathered around it came into view, Ben whispered to the deity, to its temple, to the island itself, "Thank you for your protection." Ben tells me that he's been back a number of times since then, for his son and grandson's national service. He says that he doesn't have that unwelcome feeling there anymore, and that whatever the army did certainly seemed to have worked. But he adds that he has never felt as safe as he did in the early 70s. I nod and thank him for sharing his story, just as another group of National Service boys pass our table, talking about their sergeants, their physical fitness tests, and something about a lady in white. If you want to discover more of Southeast Asia's other side, subscribe now. This episode was produced with help from Singlet Station.